This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Thank you to Campaign Sidekick for supporting this podcast, and I hope you visit campaignsidekick.vote to find out how their best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. Getting good men and women elected to public office is what keeps me involved in politics, and it's my pleasure to count this week's guest as a friend and a client. Dr. Byrd was elected in May of this year, just last month, as a city councilman here in Fort Worth, Texas. Brian's a good man and was a phenomenal candidate, and he ran as close to a technically perfect campaign as I may ever have seen. In the end, he was the only candidate running in the Fort Worth May election that successfully unseated an incumbent. Brian's a father, a medical doctor, and a successful businessman. The work ethic he brought to the campaign and the true servant's heart that he exemplified on the campaign trail tell a lot about his character, as well as why the voters put their trust in him at the election. We got to work together as Brian came through the My Campaign Coach Advanced Candidate course last fall, as a Campaign Sidekick software client, and again knocking doors for him during Get Out the Vote. It was a memorable race, and I'm excited to see him serving on the council now here in Fort Worth. Councilman Byrd, welcome to the podcast.
Raz, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Let's start out as we work up to your successful election. Let's start out talking about way back in the day when you first started growing up and here in Fort Worth. Kind of tell us about what got you involved as a doctor in business, and then eventually getting you around to deciding to throw your hat in the ring with running for office.
Yeah, thanks. So I had the privilege of growing up in a house where my parents were and are serial entrepreneurs. And Raz, that spirit of seeing an opportunity and throwing yourself completely into it was instilled in me from an early age and just never left me. And I came out of college with a business degree, but my parents had just sold their chocolate factory. It was a recession, 1992, and so I ended up going to medical school and just loved it. And we, after all of our training, opened up a private practice, but the entrepreneurial juices just had never left me. And so we opened up a hospice company, and next thing we knew, we had 4 hospice companies across Texas.
Wow.
And we found out that we really enjoy organizational leadership. And I found myself on a number of nonprofit boards just because I enjoyed the strategic planning of things. And all of this that I'm talking about fed the eventual run, because it gave me a lot of experience in leadership. It gave me a lot of experience in listening to people and understanding people, which was so important on the campaign trail. And then finally, how did we end up throwing our hat in the ring for this race? Well, Raz, the former city councilman, Bill Garrison, great guy, spent a lot of time with me before he died in 2004. It was a long time ago. And he planted the seed back then. He said, Brian, you've had the privilege of growing up in a great city. You need to take care of it. You should think about running for council someday. So after we sold our hospice companies, we decided this might be something where we would want to serve. We began studying it. And then we made our final decision Labor Day of 2016 that we were going to be all in, and all in, as you intimated, is what we had to do to unseat an incumbent.
What were some of those steps that you went through as you're thinking through that? Because you obviously had the heart to serve. You'd been studying the district. You've been living there for a long time. You grew up there. What were some of the things that went through your head as you're making that decision?
Well, we had to get the right questions on the board first. And one of the right questions was, do we have something to offer that is not currently being offered? Right?
Yeah, what makes you unique as a candidate?
Yeah, unique, and not just from a winnability standpoint, but did we have something to offer the public that wasn't being offered? Because we could have done it if we weren't offering something different, but we really wanted to have an impact, and we felt like we could do that on a number of levels. The current office holder at the time had been there a long time, and we felt like some fresh energy, a little bit younger approach, and someone who had been an entrepreneur, and that was not my opponent's background. So we felt like it was important in a bureaucracy the size of the city of Fort Worth government, which is $1.6 billion. We felt like it was very important that an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, be on council. And we there was one other entrepreneur, and still is, Carrie Moon, on council, but the other folks are more and very skilled, but more in the areas of corporations and bigger bureaucracies like those. And so we really felt like that was important, that we could distinguish ourselves in that manner, and that played very well. It also played well that the incumbent had been there 8 years, and since that person was elected, had not had an opponent. And we felt like competition makes everybody better.
Absolutely.
And we even, and somebody told us, gosh, Brian, just run and bring some competition. Even if you don't win, you'll make things better. And I thought, well, thank you very much, but if I'm going to run to win, man.
Absolutely.
So anyway.
Oh, that's an important thing, especially when you're talking about big cities like Fort Worth. I think especially when you look at the average age of the folks that serve on the council. And I don't think that age is the number one determining factor. It's not the number one thing I look at when I'm supporting a candidate. But on a council, when you've got 9 members and you have the average age is as high as it is, and we have such a young population here at Fort Worth, such a very large and growing young population, mm-hmm. It's important that with that you have that perspective shown, and you actually have somebody that is living in those communities and is friends with those people. Having somebody on there that's under the age of 65 is probably not a bad thing. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with age, but you brought on that from the nonprofit boards, from the medical background, and growing businesses from small to large, and having the experiences there. That I think brings a very, very valuable, unique perspective to the council, and I think the voters recognize that as well. It sets you apart from your opponent in a very specific way.
I would agree with that. There are, in any city, we need young entrepreneurs moving to that city, because it's the young entrepreneurs that generate the jobs, which generate the wealth, which generate the industry. And so we need somebody who understands the mindset of that young entrepreneur. And it comes into play when we start talking about turning one of our major city streets, which has been in an economic downturn. How do we make that a place where young businesses want to come? Right. And the government can't build business, but gosh, we can do our darndest to make it a place where people want to come and do business. Another area is in permitting. Fort Worth has I know we're trying to get better, but we have a lousy permitting process. It takes 6 months to get anything done. Well, that's untenable and that's unconscionable.
Absolutely.
It keeps new business starts out of the market, particularly in real estate, particularly in the contractors. And so it's another place where if you don't have good competition, you end up with a lousy product. And so I'm working with city manager on that project and some others and trying to get those up to market standards.
Well, and because of the way that you were interacting and interfacing the community and your involvement there, you knew about these things and the problems there well before you started to run. It was during that, through your involvement, you saw those problems. And so when it came time to kind of figure out what your campaign issues were, they were quite clear, because you'd been seeing those problems, had been trying through other means to help us achieve some kind of remedy there. And you realize, hey, if I actually want to impact these things, I've got to run. And so, your research as far as what are the issues people care about, you knew that pretty well going into it because you'd been living it and you were talking to a lot of people. But then you obviously, once you started going out and started talking to voters, that was a huge thing. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, talking about just a huge number of doors that you knocked in conversation with voters you had. But I'm going to go back to kind of that before Labor Day when you decided to run. Talk about, with you and your bride, how did that go? I mean, you guys were just an indomitable team on the campaign trail. But you guys had a lot of conversations about that. It was important to you both that, as a Christian and believing your marriage is your top relationship and most important thing in your life, that you guys kept that there in spite of running for office. You didn't want that to change your relationship. How did you guys go through that process?
Well, we had to understand what the commitment meant, because we didn't want to get into a commitment that we couldn't follow through all the way on. And a couple of things sort of came into place as we prayed about it and just waited. Because we gave ourselves, we really started talking about it seriously in about January of 16. And so it was about a 9-month process. So we gave ourselves enough time to just wait and listen to the Lord. one of the things where we felt like, okay, this is something that's telling us we need to do this. And this may be the Lord speaking to us. Fort Worth had really fallen behind other cities when it came to the problem of human trafficking. It just so happened that my wife was part of and is now leading a ministry that focuses on human trafficking. And here in Fort Worth, they were very frustrated with the lack of resources being committed to that, the lack of sophistication in going after the people who were the criminals in this compared to other cities. Well, you can only do so much if you're not on council.
Right.
in this regard. But if you're on council, boy, yesterday I picked up the phone and talked to the chief of police, and a wonderful guy, and very kind to take my phone call. But we just have, because we're on council now, we have that access, and we knew that going into it. So there were some synergies in place, giving ourselves enough time to wait on this decision was paramount. And we always tell our kids, look, you should listen to mom and dad because we've made a lot more mistakes than you guys have. So we've made the mistakes of reacting and making decisions from a reactionary standpoint, and gotten burned enough times that we didn't want to get burned again. And that was very, very helpful to us to take our time on that.
And you understood through that process. You knew what the calendar looked like, and you knew that if you're running for a May election, you need to be going, especially as a challenger, you need to be going full bore. In January, you probably need to have some things set up beforehand. But you knew you had time, and there wasn't any added value by pulling the trigger early, by taking that time to pray, to do your research, to talk to people, and be confident in your decision when you went in there. You'd have no reservations. You were going to be 100% committed if you said yes. And that was important for you and your confidence on the campaign trail, for your business, and for your family. And so in every possible way, you looked at that and said, this is the way we need to go about it. And then you executed.
Yeah. And we're kind of getting into now, once we made the decision that we were in, we didn't make the decision and then say, okay, now let's start working on it. We knew where the decision was heading a couple of months before the 1st of September, and we started putting platforms in place. I began stepping down. At that time, I was the executive pastor at our church, and we began setting some things up. And let me go back to a couple things there. Growing up in Fort Worth was an absolute difference maker in this campaign. Not just because of the contacts that we had, but also because what you alluded to earlier. I knew the problems before I even ran. I knew them well. And I have good friends in almost every industry in Fort Worth, leaders in almost every industry. And so just through those relationships, I understand the frustrations, and then I understand what's going well. So once we made the decision to do it, man, we were all in, right? Cannonball in the deep end, because we were taking on, we're taking on Goliath. I mean, this was a real David and Goliath situation. My opponent knew a lot of people, and he had a very wealthy backing, and he already had $100,000 in the bank. So we knew we had to go all the way or go home, and that's what we decided to do.
As you were looking at this, you knew you're going up against an 8-year incumbent that was entrenched and had a lot of friends both at City Hall, on the council, as well as outside of that. You knew, I mean, when people think about City Council, they tend to think about smaller races. This was not a small race. I'm not sure the exact number of what was finally spent by either campaign, but this is a couple $100,000 that was spent, between $200,000 and $300,000 spent, overall in this race between the two sides. There was mail. There was a ton of block walking. There was a lot of stuff, social media and other things that went in this campaign. But we're talking about a relatively small area, basically an eighth of Fort Worth, which is still several 100,000 people. You knew how many voters you needed. We knew it was going to be a high watermark election, and so you knew this would be a big deal. And you had that benefit of being a child of Fort Worth, which gave you a lot of contacts. You knew the stories of the areas. You knew the problems that each of these areas had. But, and you got right to work. So when it came, you made the decision, and they're like, okay, I gotta figure out what we're going to do here and build this plan. How did you guys approach building the campaign plan and preparing yourself for the campaign trail? Because you had a few months there.
Right. So we knew we needed to get some help from the experts because we had never done this before. And so we pounded on some doors and interviewed some candidates and ended up hiring a wonderful guy named Luke Macias, and I know you and Luke are close friends. And
he was on the podcast a few months ago as well.
Yeah, so Luke was our guide, if you will. Come on, we're going to go through this forest. We're going to come out the other side. I'm going to show you how to stay on the trail so you make it. And we would have stepped in so many potholes, but for Luke's guidance. And it was the most important relationship outside of Stephanie's and my relationship during the campaign. We were on the phone almost every day. There are, in any operation, this one no different, innumerable decisions and critical decisions every day. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't create more problems for ourselves than we already had in front of us just by taking on who we were taking on.
Well, and one of the valuable things that having a good GC or general consultant like Luke is that they can help you tell the difference in that huge volume of decisions you're making between the important ones and the unimportant ones. Because one of the areas where people get into trouble is when they don't realize the difference. They either waste too much time on the unimportant decisions when they should just be more or less flip a coin, or they don't spend enough time really thinking through strategically how to respond on the important questions. And that's one of those areas where I know Luke was of great value to you guys as well.
Yeah, he certainly was. And a good example of that is how do we approach social media? And I learned a lot of this from taking the class that you taught as well, Raz. Social media is great, but it's someplace where you don't want to put a lot of your time and resources. You want to put some, you got to have a presence on it, but it's not going to really move the needle for you that much, especially compared to your ground game, which is just where it's won and lost. At least it was, in my opinion, in our race. And, where to start knocking, which doors to knock on, which platform to use. And, of course, we use Campaign Sidekick, and we're very glad that we did. All of these things were very, very important decisions. And, I remember I was getting ready to knock on doors, and I said, Luke, why don't I just start with just absentee voters, right? It's about a third of the voters. I'll get those knocked out. And Raz, if I'd have done that, I'd have wasted so much time, right? And you know, because you're a pro too. And so that's just a good example of Luke saying, Brian. I don't care if you're a doctor. I don't care if you're whatever. You don't know what you're talking about. Let me tell you what to do. So anyway, we were delighted to be well led there.
That's good. Now, you did come through the advanced candidate course that we put on last fall, and it was I really enjoyed having you in there. What are some of the things that you didn't know going into that had a really big impact on your candidacy?
Right. So first of all, getting terminology on everything: ground game, air game. What's the matrix? How does it work together? So that we could talk about it, and because you only get to good strategy if you can talk about it, and you need efficiency in how you talk about things. Otherwise, you don't get there. So we were at ground level. We needed to know even what we call these different things. Secondly, having a platform where we could record the conversations that we had on the trail were so important. When I finally got to the point of the campaign where I was standing in front of large groups of people and talking and asking questions, I would have been dead in the water had I, A, not knocked on all those doors, and B, not recorded the answers. Because what I would do is, before I would go into one of those town hall meetings, I'd go back to the hundreds of notes that I had taken and review them. Okay, that's this person. Yes, they have a dog. Or their concern is this roadway where people are speeding. And then I would see those people at the town hall meetings. I could call them by name, and I could tell them, hey, I know you were concerned about such and such, looking forward to getting to work for you. Those were all critical pieces for us.
Well, and using the Campaign Sidekick platform, you started knocking in January, right? Early January?
We started knocking late November. Yeah.
Late November. Okay, gotcha. So you started even earlier November.
Yeah.
So as part of that, you started knocking and talking to voters, and I maybe I'm wrong, but you knocked about 5,000 doors personally, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's a lot of shoe leather. That's a lot of time and a lot of miles. I mean, just in the few weeks that I was running teams doing block walking for you, I got to know a lot of parts of Fort Worth that I didn't have familiarity, and I walked a lot of miles. You put a lot more. You knocked more doors than anybody else in your campaign, more than the rest of everybody else combined. Yeah. And not only did you have those conversations and get to look people in the eye, and shake their hand and tell them, you ask them for their vote and tell them what was most important to you. You got to have all those notes, have all those conversations where you could go into an area and you knew what the top issue was in Como versus Tanglewood, these different neighborhoods, and you knew the differences in the communities, you knew the people. And one of the things, as my teams were doing this, the get out the vote block walking, going back and talking to supporters or talking to people that are undecided, one of the things that I heard so many times was people would come and they say, oh yeah, I'm voting for Brian, or I just sent in my ballot yesterday. It's like, I know Brian. And that's significant because they met you for 30 seconds to 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. But the power of that individual interaction was not, oh yeah, I met Brian one time. So I said, I know Brian. And in their mind, they had, and because of the quality of your interaction and because of how focused they saw you being on their concerns, they really got to know you. And that was huge. Because if you're just going door to door and you're not really doing the hard work, if you're not really focusing on that person's concern and they're your world at that moment, then that relationship is not being built. But because they felt like they really knew you, they knew your character, who you were and what you cared about, and that you cared about their concerns, they were all in. And they weren't going to miss the opportunity to vote for you because they knew that you were counting on them.
Raz, the best piece of advice I ever got when I was doing my medical training came from a well-seasoned physician. And he said, Brian, when you go into an exam room, ask the patient how they're doing, what their problem is, and then just let them talk. Let them talk. Don't interrupt them. Let them talk. Take mental notes. When they finish, ask them a few, questions that you kind of need because you have the medical knowledge that you got to check the boxes on. And then when that's finished, say these words. Say, so what you're saying is, and then summarize what they have just told you.
Right.
At that moment, that person knows a couple of things about me. They know I listened to them. I took the time to do it. They know that I care. And at that point, whether it's the medical exam room or the front porch, we have a win situation, right? We're doing great. And what it does for, the candidate, in addition to, getting loyalty and building a friend, is it helps me understand what's really going on.
Yeah.
And not just on the campaign trail, but now after winning, now it helps me govern better because, things come up. So we're about to go in budget season, right? And everybody at City Hall is worried about how are we going to get this paid for? How are we going to get that paid for? And I'm saying, time out. I just talked to 4,000 people who are telling me they're going to have to sell their homes if we raise the property taxes again, which is what we've been doing the last 5 years in a row.
Right.
And so I get to bring a perspective that right now nobody on council has. Now they all get it. Don't get me wrong. They're very bright, very capable, but they haven't done the shoe leather that I've done. And I'm going to be able to speak from a position that's going to be very influential. At least we hope it's going to be influential. Well, we got to get our tax rate down. So
I believe it will be quite influential whether they like it or not, and they won't. But the good news is that with that relationship you have with these voters, and frankly, it goes beyond your district now because you've got a platform. And there's a lot of people that feel exactly like those in your district do that are throughout the city, and they don't have a voice on that right now. And so you get to provide, you get to have a great platform to help the city as a whole. While you may have District 3 that you're representing, you're also representing, because of those agreements on issues and what they feel is important, you're representing a lot of other people, and you're a voice for them. And that's one of the awesome things about both the responsibility and the opportunity that you get on the council, because you're doing stuff that's very close. I mean, we live in this democratic republic. We elect our officials, and they make decisions for us. And in that framework, we count on elected officials to work in our best interest. And too often, we feel like we're not being represented well. And so you get to be a voice for a lot of people who don't feel represented in Fort Worth right now. And that's that's a lot of why I do what I do on the My Campaign Coach side and block walking with Campaign Sidekick, is because we need more and more people running and winning that understand these things, and there's having some new blood on there, people with that entrepreneurial background, with that service background. That's huge.
Yes, it's very important. And, last night I went to a neighborhood association meeting, and they had a great showing, over 50 people there. And instead of coming in not knowing everybody, over and over again, hey, Brian, good to see you again. Great to see you. Yeah. And, because I'd met a lot of them already, because I'd knocked on their door. I'd sat at their breakfast table and drank coffee with them. Raz, you asked me what, a lot of things I learned. I was blown away how many people wanted to talk, and I mean talk extensively. because while there were some people that couldn't wait to get me off their front porch, and I don't blame them at all. I don't blame them at all. That's how I usually am. But most people wanted to talk more extensively than that. You mentioned the 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then 2 or 3 times a day, it was, I'm looking for a way to bring the conversation to a close. Yeah, and,
right.
and some of it, a lot of people just want a friend, but part of it is that they want to talk about issues that are important to them. And here's somebody who might actually be a difference maker for them. Over and over again, when I would train people to work either in hospice or work in our medical practices, I would say, look, when the patient calls or family member calls and they're angry at you, most of the time they're angry because they're scared, right? They need something, and you are the gatekeeper. And they feel powerless, and that's why they're scared. And so if you can get to what they really want, you can take that anger away. They won't need it anymore. You see, they feel like that anger is their only route to really getting something done, and that's what they want. They want something done, and doggone it, I like doing stuff, right? So, I'm talking too much now, but gosh, people ask me, why did you run? Why did you run? I'll tell you, Raz, if you boil it all down, it's because I want my life to count. I want my life to matter. And this is where I felt like this is where I need to make it matter, right here. There's all kinds of places to make it matter, but this is where I can really make a difference in people's lives.
Well, I think that's a huge testament to your character, because there are a whole lot of different motivations, several of them admirable for running, but I think that's among the best. And those are the kind of people that I like working with, and part of why you and I got along so well is because you have that perspective. But to your point about those conversations, I always tell folks, look, when you're going to the door, the most important thing is not that you outline your 10-point plan for making a difference or all the things you're going to do. The most important thing is you ask them what they care about and listen. And that when you walk away from the door, that they feel like you listened, you care, and that they have a positive association there. And especially as the candidate, it's good as some block walker or volunteer, but it's especially important as a candidate, because the number of times that person is going to have the opportunity to have your undivided attention is realistically low. You're going to be out there maybe doing some off-season block walking, coming back the next election cycle, but this is their chance to get to talk to you, and this is your chance to earn their vote and build that relationship. And if you really take that to heart and you're listening to what they, if you care about governing based on what your district cares about, then each one of those conversations is an important, integral element in that process. And by taking that time and hearing from them, it's a huge help. But I'll tell you what it also is. It's a huge help to you when you get later on in that campaign trail. Because as you alluded to earlier, once we got about halfway through, we got middle of the spring, you were all of a sudden getting invited to these candidate forums and having these bigger public speaking opportunities. And you had a level of understanding of that district and those voters that the incumbent had no clue of.
Yes, exactly.
How did that impact your race at that point?
Oh, it was significant. Honestly, I was rather frightened that the town hall meetings would not go my way. And I can tell you that my opponent, if I'm reading him right, and again, great guy, but my sense about him was that he felt like he would dominate those town hall meetings because he had a superior knowledge about how the Fort Worth government works, and he did, and he should have. He'd been the incumbent for 8 years. But where we were able to shine was that we knew what the people really cared about, and we knew that more than he did. And so I was just able to speak to people's hearts and minds because I knew at least I thought I knew what was going on there. I'm just basing it on what they told me. A couple other pieces there, having campaign sidekicks feature where it shows you before we knocked on the door, we knew if they were Republican or Democrat, we knew how old they were, and we just knowing things about them allowed us to be able to connect with them, and that's what we needed to do, because once you connect with them, then they start feeling a little more comfortable talking about some of the issues that are important to them.
Well, and using that tool with Campaign Sidekick can be able to see a little bit about those individuals, knowing their age, knowing how many people are in the household, knowing who was there, those types of things, and their political background, et cetera. That helps you put your first foot forward, because the pitch you gave, the message that we were conveying at each of those doors was the same. But the way you open a conversation, where you get that started, may vary based on the different people. Just like in an interview or a networking opportunity, it's going to be different based on what you perceive about the individual. And I'll tell you what that was really powerful was once my teams got in the field and we were going back to these homes where you'd already had conversations, And we were able to see something about that conversation, what issue is most important to them, what their response was at the door before, whether they're undecided or supporting you, et cetera. That was huge because we got to start out the conversation from some kind of data point that we weren't starting over cold, right? We were starting, you're kind of picking up a pre-existing conversation. And that was really, really powerful. It saved us time, rather than rattling off a bunch of stuff that they already knew. We could go in with, hey, you met Brian a while back. He was at your door. He had, as we were, he told me that this was the most important issue to you. We wanted to follow up now that it's time to turn out and vote. Just ask you what your concerns are about this election, if there's anything that's on your mind, and just remind you that here's the times and the dates and the locations for you to get out and vote. We'd really appreciate your support.
It's a game changer. People appreciate that so much. What? He remembered? He wrote it down. He told you? Wow, he must really care about me, and we do. And so that's a game changer, that personal touch. And you can see the different corporations, Amazon, Google, doing that. They get to know their customer as well as they possibly can, and then they bring them products that they think that kind of person would want. I mean, it's really smart way of marketing. And now one of the features I loved on there was, while I'm at the door, I could take the note, I could tap whether or not they wanted a yard sign, I could put in their phone number, their email address, and when I left that front porch, I was done. That was locked in. And for us, we knew one of the problems that we had to overcome was we did not have the name recognition. Despite growing up in District 3 and knowing a lot of people, compared to my opponent who had a great name, easy to remember, we had a deficiency there. And so we really pushed from the very beginning yard signs. Do you mind if I put a yard sign in? We'll put it up, around March, late February. Sure, Brian, you can put up a yard sign, that sort of thing. And we put up our very first weekend, we put up almost 900 yard signs. I mean, it was an unprecedented blanketing. And
they were
so
everywhere.
They were. And I remember we looked at it. We had at least one yard sign on almost every street in the district. You couldn't miss it. And so overnight, I went from having very little name recognition to fantastic name recognition. And from that point on, and of course, we kept door knocking all the way to May 6th. Oh, I've seen your yard signs. Oh, you're that guy. Oh, I've been wondering who that is. And so there's chatter on Facebook. Who is Brian Byrd? And because when they see that many yard signs, they know he has a lot of support. He's got a chance of winning. Not a lot of people know about him. Why don't I know about him? So all of that played a big role. That moment, though, that weekend was a game changer for us. And it also caused my opponent to make his first big mistake, which, I love it when my opponents make mistakes.
Unforced errors are just an absolute blessing when they happen to the other guy.
Yeah, and I made my share, and so I don't want to single him out, but he made a big mistake that weekend that really helped us because the way he chose to respond to us doing that really worked against him.
So one of the things that was big in your race, we talked about earlier, was the amount of money that was going to be raised and spent. And so you set a target number of what you want to raise and spend, and I know you contributed some yourself, but talk to me about how you went about figuring out your dollar amount and then getting there.
Well, we originally shot way too low. We thought, we'll need $50,000. We'll do a mailer or two at the end, and that'll cost X amount. Well, when it turned out, we ended up raising just shy of $130,000. I think was the last time I checked it. And particularly in the first weeks and months of the election, I would just commit a certain amount of time every day to call through my list of potential donors, and it was grueling, right? I mean,
and this was pretty much just calling through what I usually call your Christmas card list, right? These are people first level contacts that know you, and saying, "Hey, I'm running. This is why I'm running. I need your help."
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. And some people, Brian, before I even asked for money, you're running. I've got money for you. And some people, it took 2 or 3 calls and a reminder. But eventually we got through it. But it was just work. And you know what? If you do the work, the money will come. And if you're sincere about what you're really doing, the money's going to come. Because people want to get behind something that's bigger than they are. Yes. They love to get behind that. And so we gave them a vision for what we wanted to do with bringing an entrepreneurial spirit to the council, with bringing just my reputation in the business world and my family's reputation and in the evangelical world. we presented a vision that people wanted to get behind, and they got behind it. So it was doing the hard work and then having the right vision that we really believed in that were the key to fundraising. And then at the end, we got a big endorsement from the firefighters who were the #1 contributors. We had a first-class developer. I mean, if you asked me, Brian, if there's one developer in town you would want to be on your team, who would it be? I'd have said this person. And that just it just really worked out, and that really helped carry us.
Well, and a big part of both getting the votes as well as getting the dollars was something we emphasize heavily during our coaching courses. It's the kind of the 3 whys. It's like, why you, why now, and why this office? And the answers that you had to those questions, they came out every time you opened your mouth. I feel like if you talked in your sleep, your wife was probably getting tired of you going through those 3 questions and answers.
I usually just snore, by the way, but apparently. So, anyway.
So you had worked really long and hard, I know, during the coaching course as well as after, honing those responses. Because when you're going and asking somebody for money, whether it's $25 or $5,000, you got to have good answers. And if you can articulate your vision, why this is the time and why this is the place for you to make an impact, then it's going to inspire them. And more often than not, you're going to get a good response. It may not be as many zeros behind the numbers you want, but you're going to get buy-in from them.
Well, so you encouraged me, Raz, way back when, in the fall when we were taking the course, practice it, get it down, and just have it in the can ready to go. Have it completely memorized, and you're right. After a while, I could just do it in my sleep, because when you're knocking on doors, yes, the number one thing is you've got to connect, you've got to listen, they've got to know that you really care and that you're hearing things, but they're going to ask you a lot of the time, well, why you? And you got to have it ready to go, man. You know what I mean? You can't hesitate or go and it's got to come. And this is how we would train our salespeople. We would say, you've got to believe that this is the best hospice company in town. I mean, I really want you to believe it. And so I want you to go on ride-alongs with our nurses and see the care that they're giving. So, because if you don't have that, you're just another person out there. And there's too many of them out there. That's exactly right. It's the difference between words and heart. And so you've got to be 100% committed to running and why you're doing it. And it can't just be, well, this is a stepping stone to something else. Yes. It might be. But if that's your primary focus, it's not going to carry the day. That's a hollow. No. And then the other piece of it was we wanted to build a house on firm foundation of a donor base. And I think when it was all over, we had 300 people. Was it that many? Forgive me, Raz. It may be closer to like 250, but it was over 200. That's a great base, right? And so it's not just me. I mean, I could have written a big check, but that's a house of cards. We wanted people who were all in, and I'll tell you what it did for me. Besides financing us and giving us the basic support, it made me work harder, because I knew. I mean, now I wanted to win, and I was gonna work my tail off to win. I didn't want to let anybody down. I mean, because I knew so many people had committed money, they committed time, they were committed prayer, they were block walking with me. I mean, you saw them, and doggone it, we wanted to win on May 6th, so it made us work even harder.
What were some of those big hurdles that you overcame, and kind of how did you approach this? Because I know there were several there on the campaign trail, especially as we got closer to election day. What were some of those, and how did you overcome them? Well, one of the things that we had to do was we had to watch our opponent very closely. And it's sort of the art of war, which you've talked about. You've got to know your enemy and know what they're doing. And so when my opponent went negative on me, we had to think very carefully how we were going to respond to that. And I was getting, advice from one person who would say, well, you got to respond immediately. You've got to defend yourself. And then other approaches and philosophies were to know if you jump out there and say, that's not true, then you're playing into your opponent's hand. We had to figure that out on the fly. And what worked for us was to ignore our opponent's accusations against us. Now, we were able to do that because we didn't really feel like they would stick. There was nothing really to them. They were grasping at straws. They knew where they were behind. And so they were making things up about me. They'd find a little thing, a little grain of truth, and make it into this huge thing.
which overall was untrue. And so knowing how to respond to that was, I think, very important. If, for example, I had responded or reacted, because responding is not the right word. I think responding in a healthy way is the way to do it. But I wanted to react, and my family wanted me to react. Right?
Because these were not just, Brian wants to do this in Council. This is basically saying Brian's a liar and a cheat, and he's a bad man. That was the gist of these attacks, and I mean those hurt. I mean, I know they hurt your family a lot, and they caused you a lot of heartburn. You weren't happy about it. You rightfully don't like being called a liar and a cheat and a bad person. But one of the things that allowed you guys to have that more composed response, a much better reaction, was the fact that people already knew you. You already had 5,000 doors and thousands of conversations under your belt. And so when somebody said, "Hey, Brian's a liar and a terrible, terrible person," the response, Luke told you this, I told you this, and you knew this, was that they knew who you were. They knew you. Yeah. And so if you'd have just been running TV ads and radio and social media and maybe some mailers, they wouldn't have known you. And so it'll left you open a lot more to that liability from those attacks. But because these people had you sitting at their dinner table and sitting on their front porch with them and you talk with them at Starbucks, because you had that, you didn't have to be as worried. And in the end, that allowed you to be very, very composed, to let it roll off your back and really redirect the conversation and not get trapped in some cycle of getting off the issues. It allowed you to stick with them and even focus harder in some ways on the issues, because you know that you were so far in their head that they were having to make up lies about you to go with. Yeah,
well, they, for them, it's a very risky move to go negative on me, because they're the incumbent. Incumbents hardly ever lose in Fort Worth. I mean, you can count them on one hand, despite the fact that you've got 9 people running every 2 years, and you add all that up over 20 years, you got just a handful of times an incumbent loses. And so when an incumbent goes negative, that does not come across well with a large portion of the voter base. And so that gave us a lot of votes just by them doing that. It's different when a challenger goes on the attack, because the challenger has to show the person not just why they should vote for the challenger, but why they should fire the incumbent. And so it's a different dynamic there. Whereas all the incumbent needs to show is why you should keep me here. I've done a good job. The incumbent should be able to point to his or her record and say, you want this to continue, please vote for me. And here's the other things here's what I've done, here's what I'm going to do. Thank you for your support. But when they went negative on us, we knew they were desperate, and we knew they were behind. And so how we responded was so important, because if we'd have played into their hand, things could have turned out differently.
Yeah, it really puts you guys in a strength position that you guys did a good job taking advantage of. I mean, I think it was a turning point for the way that we all saw the race. And we weren't running polling, we weren't doing those things, and so that was really our best barometer of kind of when the tides had turned, because they knew, and then we knew that there was a problem there.
Yep, yeah, that's exactly right. Another critical decision. Well, let me go back just a second. One of the mistakes we made early on was we thought we would fly under the radar all the way up to Election Day. We really thought
that they weren't going to notice you.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought through it well enough. I hadn't done it before. But what I was hoping was that we would just fly under the radar. We'd put some yard signs up a month before, and then they notice us, but by then it's too late. Well, I knocked on so many doors of people that I eventually knocked on the doors of close friends of my opponent.
Yeah.
And so word starts getting back, and then people start posting on social media. Well, this guy named Byrd came by, or they had attend one of our events, and hey, I just attended this event, and there's a new candidate. Right? Well, forget flying under the radar. Then the newspaper catches on, and so having a strategy that is realistic is really important, and so we were not ready for that, so we had to adapt to that. That was important. And then we made the decision we would not go negative unless our opponent did, and because them going negative on us did cost us votes. There's no question about it.
Yes,
and even in my own neighborhood, and you noticed that, because you knock on doors and they'd say, I can't believe Brian, believes this, when he told me he believed something else, about there was a particular issue going on there with a bridge. And it was sad to me that so many people actually believed what was on a printed material that was, put in their mailbox. But that's the realities of it. The average voter, in my estimation, will tell you, I do not like negative campaigning. But guess what they respond to?
Absolutely.
It's what we human beings respond to.
Yeah.
I'm not pointing fingers. I'm one of them too. And so we made sure whatever piece of mail we put out there, we made sure that it was the absolute truth, right? And we had it backed up with data, and we had the source on it, the newspaper article or the statistical information on it. And all that being said, Raz, if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of anything in campaigning, it would be mailers. I just think it's such a lousy way to communicate message. It's a terrible way to communicate message because you're so compact in what you can say, and really the only thing that works, the only thing that really moves the needle is to say something negative about your opponent or your opponent's record. And we stayed on our opponent's record. We never went after character. We never went after the person individually.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction that I think it took a little bit of a while for you to warm up to, and I know it does for a lot of candidates, is the difference between negative and dirty. And that's really an important distinction in my mind, because your opponent's record is fair game, and you have to set a difference between you and them. You have to define that difference of what they'll get, kind of what the product is. Buying from X vendor versus Y vendor, what's the difference? Why should I buy from you, not them? That's the question you're having to answer for them, really, before they ask when you're making your pitch. And if there's nothing wrong with what they've got, then why would they vote for somebody new? And so you have to make that differentiation.
Yep.
And what you did a very good job of, as you mentioned, is you made sure that anything that came out of your mouth or came out of your campaign was fact-checked, that you were very comfortable that standing before God or anybody else that you were said, this is the truth. This is what they did. This is the result of their actions. And that's important because you didn't go dirty. You went negative, but that was only insofar as you pointed at his record. And honestly, if pointing out somebody's record is going negative on them, that's their problem, not yours.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was one thing we said on the campaign trail that ended up being untrue. And it was a statistic. And so, and it was comparing the cost of bus rides to Uber and Lyft. And anyway, I was trying to make a point about, the bigger point was getting the marketplace involved in some of these city services. But here was the key. The key was, when we discovered that we had made a mistake, we went public immediately and said, we made a mistake on this. We said it was this amount, it's actually this other amount.
Right.
And boy, that was important to do early on. But as far as I know, that was the only time where we said something that was untrue, and we just weren't aware it was untrue. Anyway, I make that point just to say, if you make a mistake, boy, own up to it immediately. That gives you your best chance.
So, Brian, I want to be respectful of your time, and I definitely want to have you get on again sometime soon, because there's a lot more of advice that I think you can give to folks that are listening and folks that are fixing to run their own campaign. But I just want to, as we're wrapping up today, give you a chance to, what are some of the closing pieces of advice you've got for folks that are thinking about running for office this next cycle?
Well, let me just do some broad brushstrokes. First of all, I had an absolute ball, and that's so important. If it's not something that you're really going to enjoy, don't do it. If you don't think you're going to enjoy standing on porches and listening to people talk, it's too much to do. And I'm not saying you have to love it, but you've got to enjoy at least a piece of that, because it's so important to winning. And honestly, it's so important to governing. I remember people saying, well, you have the advantage, Brian, because you can jump into this thing full time, and your opponent he has to be a city council member, and he's got a lot of governing to do, or you're not doing any governing. My response was, I'm out listening to people who have real concerns, and they're communicating to me what those concerns are. I'm documenting those. That sounds like good governance to me.
Yeah, that sounds like something a councilman should do.
That's exactly right. And so so number one, you've got to really love what you're doing. Number two, get good advice, get good counsel, choose the right people. Find and one of the things I looked at with Luke Macias was he wins. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I want somebody that now Luke's a young man, but his record's fantastic. I mean, the guy knows how to win. So find somebody who wins. Number three, get a good base like Campaign Sidekick. Technology.
Absolutely.
It'll pay dividends not just for this campaign, but for your next campaign and when you're governing. Because right now, yes, I'm governing, but I'm also keeping both eyes on 2019. And everything I do, I'm thinking about that. And so what that means is keeping my constituents informed on what's going on. And I have their addresses, their emails, and so communicating with them all along is key to a re-election victory in 2019. Next one is make sure you're okay with losing. My campaign, we ran a good campaign, but we still could have lost. And you know what? We'd have been okay. We told that to our kids over and over again, partly because I needed to hear myself say it. But
that helps.
Yeah. Pardon me, but you need to know that you're going to be okay. And so you have to have bigger drivers in your life than just winning this campaign. It can't be the warp and woof of your life. There has to be something higher and more important than winning. And then probably, and I probably should have started with this, if you're married, your spouse has to be all in, and I mean all in. And so take the time to do it and make sure that person really is on board with this, because they're going to be sucked into not just doing a lot of work, but our entire house was transformed. I mean, Raz, you came over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was party central, man. I mean, there are people there all the time. I remember one time I walked out, there were 9 people scattered around our house during get out the vote time, making phone calls, just cranking through those things, man. And if you like that sort of thing, great. If your spouse doesn't, then you need to have that conversation on the front end. And also your spouse has to understand that there are going to be some emotionally very trying times about this, especially when it comes down to the end and you either lose or you risk losing or your opponent goes negative on you. Have those conversations on the front end. Are we okay? I know I said that was it, but we also wish we'd have prepared our family members better for that. A good example is before I made it to our victory party, which ended up being a victory party, we didn't know what it was going to be. One of the Star-Telegram newspaper reporters showed up, and I wasn't there, and this person went around interviewing all of our family members. Whoops, right? And fortunately, our family members did fantastic, but they might not have, right? Because they hadn't been in it. They had their own lives. They were doing, one's a full-time pastor, another sells cars, and that was their world. But to make sure you don't make mistakes, you really have to be in it and know your craft, know the political craft. But anyway, preparing your family members, just how to respond when a reporter calls or asks you a question is also a good thing to do. Well, man, forgive me, I went on way too long there.
No, not at all. That's important advice, and all of those things are spot on. So I really appreciate you pointing those out to folks. Well, Brian, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to see you there. I'm really glad it turned into a victory party. It was a wonderful night. It was a hard-fought campaign that I know you put more sweat in than anybody, but you had a lot of good people around you. And it was a pleasure to be part of that. And I'm excited. I'm already jocked up for 19, so we're ready to roll.
Awesome.
So we appreciate the work that you're doing, and now we'll let you get back to it. Thank you for taking the time to come talk to us today.
Raz, it was my absolute pleasure, and great to be on here. Great to have you guys as friends. And I'll throw this one other thing in there too, is that during that course, I was knocking on doors, and it was everyday application. I mean, it was just wonderful because I could be out knocking doors, and then I'd get off and I'd be on the course for an hour, and it was absolute application to what we were doing. It was so incredibly helpful. So I know I've told you this a ton of times. Thank you, Raz. We wouldn't be here without you.
Well, I appreciate it, Brian. It was a blast having you in the course, and you were one of the folks we've had come through the course that actually filed and ran for office, and so our current success rate's 100%. So I know it won't last, but I'll hang on to it while we got it. And it was great to see you run that race. So you take care, sir, and we'll talk to you guys again next week here on the podcast.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.